A stunned silence gripped the courtroom. There wasn't a sound, no whispered conversation, no shuffling papers, not even the faintest cough. Judge Robin Tarnowski had just made a move no one had expected. She played an audio recording that stunned every person in the courtroom, including Sean "Diddy" Combs. As his voice played over the speakers, Diddy's expression shifted dramatically. The confidence he had worn throughout the trial dissolved instantly. Color drained from his face as the gravity of what was being said in his own voice registered, not just with him, but with everyone listening. Several jurors leaned back, visibly shaken by what they were hearing. Before we continue, if you're new here, please hit like and subscribe. We cover the biggest courtroom dramas of high-profile cases. This moment hadn't been forecast. The morning had been expected to revolve around routine debates about what evidence could be shown to the jury. Legal teams were presenting standard motions, the usual rhythm of pre-trial argumentation. Then, without prior notice, Judge Tarnowski made a surprising declaration. I have listened to this recording in chambers. I find it essential that the jury hears it in full. A ripple of gasps moved through the courtroom. Even the court reporter hesitated mid-transcription. There had been no indication this was coming, no heads-up, no prior discussion. The judge simply ordered the technician to play Exhibit 24B on the courtroom audio system. Up to that point, Diddy had kept a cool exterior. He'd appeared calm, collected, if not entirely at ease, then at least in control. But something changed in that instant. Perhaps it was the awareness that this recording still existed. Perhaps it was the shock of realizing the court deemed it admissible. Or maybe it was hearing his own unfiltered words about to contradict the entire defense narrative. Whatever the cause, the mask dropped. He wasn't a music icon in that moment. He was a man on trial, his own voice put. Tension hung heavy in the air. You could hear the hum of the audio system warming up as the technician made final adjustments. The room held its breath. Reporters leaned in, their pens hovering over notebooks, anticipating every word. In the gallery, members of Diddy's family exchanged anxious looks, a silent current of fear running between them. The prosecution sat motionless, deliberately unreadable. At the defense table, Diddy turned quickly to his attorney, whispering something with urgency. His lawyer placed a calming hand on his arm and gave a small, resolute shake of the head. The message was clear. There's no stopping this now. Judge Robin Tarnowski then addressed the jury in a calm, steady voice. You are about to hear an audio recording made on September 3, 2019, at a private residence in Los Angeles. The voice you'll hear is that of the defendant, Sean Combs, speaking with another individual whose identity is known to the court. I urge you to consider this recording within the full context of the evidence presented throughout the trial. She gave a nod to the technician. Please begin. There was a brief crackle of static, and then, through the speakers, came the unmistakable voice of Sean Combs. He sounded relaxed, unfiltered, comfortable. No one in the room could have predicted what was about to follow. A turning point in the trial. The audio started innocently enough. Glasses clinked in the background, and faint music suggested a casual, private gathering. Diddy's tone was easygoing, laughing over an inside joke or trivial topic. His conversation partner, another man with a slightly deeper voice, sounded just as relaxed. They talked about a recent industry event, mentioned a few mutual acquaintances. Nothing unusual. Then, around the 3-minute mark, the tone began to shift. The other man asked, "What about that situation with the girl from the party? Is that handled?" There was a pause, liquid being poured into a glass. Then Diddy answered, his voice lower, but still carrying a confident edge. "Always handled. That's why I have a system. That's why I pay people what I pay them." The man pushed further. "But she was talking about going to the press, man. That's different." Diddy didn't miss a beat. Talking's one thing. Doing's another. They all talk at first. Then they remember how things work in this town. They remember who helps them get jobs, who can make sure they never get hired again. It's business. The jury was silent, but visibly reacting now. What had started as a social conversation was quickly becoming something far more damning. Diddy's voice grew bolder, his words more revealing. He described what he called his infrastructure, a network of trusted people tasked with managing delicate problems behind the scenes. "You've been to the parties," he said. "You've seen the setup. Phones get checked at the door. NDAs before they even get in the car. The right mix of things to help people loosen up. None of it's accidental. It's all designed to work." There was a shift in the other man's tone, less casual now, almost uncertain. But some of those girls, man, they're not okay. That model ended up in the hospital. Diddy cut him off sharply. And who paid for that hospital visit? Who made sure the cops weren't involved? Who got her that runway gig with that French brand a few months later? She's fine. They're all fine. They get something out of it. I get something out of it. The ones who play the game, they move up. The ones who don't. He didn't finish the sentence. Inside the courtroom, the jury sat frozen. Some scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Others stared ahead, visibly disturbed. One elderly juror wiped at her eyes, struggling to stay composed. Diddy remained completely still, eyes locked onto the polished surface of the defense table. His lawyer had shifted closer, now resting a firm hand on his shoulder, an unmistakable gesture of both restraint and reassurance. The audio continued to play, now moving into even more unsettling territory. Diddy could be heard recounting specific incidents that, up to this point, had only been described by witnesses during the trial. But this time, the narrative was from his own mouth. To him, these weren't stories of victimization. Instead, he portrayed them as mutual arrangements, deals where everyone benefited. They start acting like they don't know the deal, his voice said, cool and self-assured. I'm the one who found them, gave them a shot, opened the right doors. And then they start believing they did it all on their own. Like they forgot who gave them power in the first place. The man on the other end of the recording pushed back, his tone shifting to concern. But it's not just about deals anymore, man. Some of the stuff that went down, there were no lines. That girl didn't agree to that. Diddy interrupted without hesitation. She agreed the moment she accepted the lifestyle. The gifts, the trips, the jobs, that was the agreement. Everything else, just part of the package. The most incriminating moments. As the minutes passed, the conversation revealed more: Diddy's tactics for maintaining control, how he ensured people stayed quiet, and what happened when they didn't. He named individuals, some of whom had already testified in court, and described moments that aligned exactly with the prosecution's timeline of events. Only this time, it wasn't third-party testimony. It was a first-hand account. The most critical moment came around the 15-minute mark. That's when the topic of consent was brought up directly. Consent, Diddy said, his voice calm and almost clinical, is just a contract. I offer them things, they take those things. That's the deal. The issue isn't consent. It's when they want to change the terms after they've already taken what I gave them. That's not how any of this works. The other speaker now sounded visibly disturbed. But some of them are saying they were drugged, that they weren't even capable of consenting. A silence followed, broken only by the thud of a glass being set down hard. Then, Diddy's voice returned, quieter, sharper. Who's really going to believe them? Their word? Against mine? Against the machine I've built around me? I've spent my entire life making sure no one can win that fight. In the courtroom, one of the prosecutors visibly tensed, her eyes shut for a brief second, as if hearing Diddy confirm the prosecution's core arguments made the moment even heavier. At the defense table, Diddy's lead lawyer was scribbling fast, occasionally leaning over to whisper urgently to his team, likely strategizing ways to counter the damage unraveling in real time. From the bench, Judge Tarnowski kept a close eye on the jury, silently assessing each of their reactions. Meanwhile, the recording continued, revealing more of Diddy's alleged methods, how witnesses were silenced, how damaging evidence was buried, and how his team handled threats before they could ever make it to court. It's not about whether something happened or didn't, Diddy said in the recording. It's about making sure no one can prove it. No credible witnesses. No evidence. By the time they even think about coming forward, I've already won. The final blow. As the damning recording approached its final moments, the unnamed second speaker posed one last, pointed question. But aren't you worried? With all this #MeToo stuff happening, people are starting to take these accusations seriously. What followed was a low, unsettling laugh, Diddy's voice again, this time laced with arrogance. That's for people without real power, he scoffed. I've got senators on speed dial. Police chiefs come to my house for drinks. I've spent 3 decades building a system around me. You think I'm scared of a Twitter movement? Then came the unmistakable clinking of glasses. A toast, Diddy said with calm certainty, to being untouchable. Balance, scale, shock, and silence. As the audio ended, the courtroom was swallowed by silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow, like the oxygen had been drained from the space. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the sound of the courthouse HVAC seemed distant. Judge Robin Tarnowski broke the stillness. The record will reflect that Exhibit 24B has been played in full for the jury. She turned toward the defense table. Counsel, do you wish to respond at this time? Diddy's lead attorney slowly rose to his feet. Although still composed, the strain was visible on his face. Yes, Your Honor. We're requesting a short recess to consult with our client. The judge gave a curt nod. This court is in recess for 30 minutes. She addressed the jury. You are reminded not to discuss this or any other evidence among yourselves or with anyone else during the break. As jurors exited the box, most avoided even glancing in Diddy's direction. From the gallery, murmurs erupted the moment Judge Tarnowski left the bench. The atmosphere had shifted completely, and for the first time during the proceedings, Sean Diddy Combs no longer looked composed or in control. He looked frightened. Yellow Square, a changed atmosphere. When the courtroom reconvened half an hour later, the tension was different, thicker, more deliberate. Diddy appeared calmer, but the confident image he had maintained from the outset was noticeably fractured. His attorney sat tightly around him, speaking in hushed tones, urgently trading notes. On the other side of the aisle, the prosecution remained composed, like they had just won a battle without lifting a finger. Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson stood ready, waiting silently for proceedings to continue. Judge Tarnowski entered and addressed the court. Before we resume, the court wishes to clarify the context of the audio recording heard by the jury. She paused, scanning the room before continuing. The recording was obtained from a confidential informant who was present during the conversation in question. The individual recorded it legally under California's one-party consent law, which allows recordings made by a participant in the conversation. She went on. The defense has raised multiple objections to the admissibility of this evidence. Those objections have been reviewed thoroughly and overruled. The recording has undergone forensic analysis by 3 independent experts, all of whom verified its authenticity. This court finds the recording highly relevant to the charges at hand, specifically those related to racketeering and sex trafficking. Its value to the case clearly outweighs any potential prejudicial effect. She then turned to the prosecution. You may proceed with your next witness. Blue Square, the FBI takes the stand. Emily Johnson stepped forward. The government calls Special Agent Marcus Rivera of the FBI, a man in his late 40s, with a military-style haircut and crisp navy suit, took the stand. He was sworn in before the jury, then seated himself upright and alert. After laying out his background and credentials in organized crime and human trafficking investigations, the questioning began in earnest. Agent Rivera, were you directly involved in the investigation that led to the recovery of the audio the jury just heard? Yes, I was, Rivera replied with confidence. I've served as the lead case agent on the investigation into Mr. Combs since early 2020. And can you explain how that recording came into federal custody? In December 2019, a person approached our office with credible information regarding Mr. Combs's alleged criminal activities, Rivera stated. This individual had worked within Mr. Combs's inner circle for several years and claimed to have first-hand knowledge of various incidents. After verifying their credibility, we officially designated them a confidential informant. Johnson continued. Was this same individual responsible for making the recording the jury just heard? Yes, Rivera confirmed. The informant had already made that recording months before contacting us, as a form of self-protection. They feared potential retaliation if Mr. Combs ever suspected they were questioning his actions or speaking out. Documenting the pattern. Approaching the witness stand with a sheet of paper in hand, Prosecutor Emily Johnson addressed the bench. Your Honor, the government moves to admit this FBI memorandum as Exhibit 25. After Judge Tarnowski formally accepted the document into evidence, Johnson turned back toward the witness stand. Agent Rivera, this document outlines the initial conversation your team had with the confidential informant. Could you summarize for the jury what specific concerns that individual raised? Rivera adjusted slightly in his seat before responding. The informant described what they believed to be an organized system, directed by Mr. Combs, for identifying, luring, and ultimately exploiting young women, especially those aspiring to succeed in the entertainment industry. They detailed techniques of manipulation and control that included the use of narcotics, coercion, financial leverage, and even blackmail. They were particularly alarmed by the alleged use of date rape drugs at private parties and the filming of individuals in vulnerable positions without their knowledge or consent. The courtroom gallery reacted immediately. Several journalists began hammering on laptop keyboards. Across the aisle, Diddy's relatives looked stunned, one or two dabbing their eyes with tissues. At the defense table, Diddy sat stone still, his jaw clenched tight. Johnson continued, "Once the FBI obtained the recording, what actions did you take to authenticate it?" Rivera responded without hesitation. "The recording was submitted to our forensic audio unit. They performed a thorough analysis, confirming 3 key things. 1. That the audio was genuine and unaltered. 2. That the voices on the recording definitively belonged to Mr. Combs and the informant. And 3. That the environmental audio, background noises and acoustics, matched the location in which the conversation was said to have occurred. And did the recording serve as the starting point for additional INV?" The network exposed. Johnson walked to the courtroom screens, where a large chart had been projected for the jury. "Agent Rivera, please walk the jury through this organizational chart." Rivera stood and gestured to the diagram, a web of names and titles with Diddy positioned squarely at the top. "This chart is a visual summary of the structure we believe Mr. Combs built and maintained to operate what amounts to a criminal organization. He sat at the apex, making the key decisions and giving direction. Below him were a group of loyal operatives, trusted associates who executed his orders and shielded him from the more overtly illegal activity." He went on to explain the various roles. Security staff were responsible for managing access to parties and ensuring certain individuals could not leave. Medical professionals were reportedly involved in supplying controlled substances. Fixers managed threats, payoffs, and silencing tactics. Attorneys created non-disclosure agreements and negotiated settlements. And at the very base of the chart, the victims. What stood out most, Rivera added, was the compartmentalization. Individuals only knew their piece of the puzzle. Very few, if any, understood the full operation. That kind of structure is typical in organized crime, designed to insulate the leader and limit liability. Corroborating the evidence. Rivera continued his testimony by methodically linking evidence obtained during the FBI investigation with statements heard in the earlier audio recording. He referenced bank records showing payments made to women who had accused Mr. Combs of abuse, most of whom abruptly recanted after receiving those payments. He identified text messages that directed security personnel to physically prevent women from leaving exclusive gatherings. He highlighted hospital records tied to several women who were treated for drug-related symptoms after attending parties hosted by Diddy. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Rivera addressed a claim from one of the alleged victims, previously attacked by the defense, as implausible. A woman who testified earlier said that, when she refused to engage in sexual activity at a 2018 event, she was told, "Consent is a contract." The defense cast doubt on that statement, calling it too specific and unlikely. But now, as the jury has heard for themselves, Mr. Combs used that exact phrase in the recording. This strongly suggests it was a phrase he used repeatedly, part of a broader pattern of manipulation and justification. Diddy's outburst. As Agent Rivera's testimony progressed, Diddy's frustration became harder to hide. He leaned in repeatedly to speak with his lawyers in hushed, tense tones. They whispered back urgently, trying to contain his growing agitation. But the moment Rivera began linking statements from the recording directly to the testimonies of alleged victims, Diddy suddenly pushed back from the defense table and stood up. "This is all false," he yelled, voice loud and raw. "That recording is completely misrepresented." His attorneys tried to pull him back, but the damage was already done. Judge Tarnowski slammed her gavel down with authority. "Mr. Combs, sit down at once," she ordered firmly. "You may not address the court directly unless you do so through your counsel or while under oath as a witness." 2 uniformed security officers began approaching the defense table. Diddy's lead counsel placed a calming hand on his arm. "Sean, please," he said under his breath, "this isn't helping your case." Diddy glared at the courtroom but finally sat down again. The silence that followed felt heavy with consequence, though the judge gave a direct instruction. "Members of the jury, you are to disregard the defendant's interruption. It is not to be considered as part of the evidence in this case." The expression on several jurors' faces told a different story. For the first time, many of them stared directly at Diddy, some with frowns, others with narrowed eyes. The mix of disappointment and unease was palpable. An expert weighs in. The prosecution resumed, now laying out the full picture, the recording, the investigation, and the testimonies of the accusers, each strand tightly woven into what they presented as an organized structure of abuse. By the time Agent Rivera stepped down, the defense's narrative that these allegations were exaggerated or motivated by money appeared to have crumbled. The jury had now heard Diddy, in his own voice, describe acts that aligned directly with what the prosecution had spent weeks establishing, that this was not a matter of isolated incidents or misunderstandings, but rather a long-running, deliberate system of exploitation. Yellow Square: The Psychology of Power and Silence. Next, the government called its expert witness, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a specialist in trauma psychology and the dynamics of coercion and abuse. With her composed demeanor and silver-streaked hair, she stepped into the witness box with the assurance of someone deeply experienced in courtrooms. The prosecutor walked her through her qualifications, decades of clinical work, academic research, and testimony in numerous human trafficking and abuse trials. Then came the pivotal question. Dr. Montgomery, based on your expertise, how would you interpret the content of the recorded conversation? She leaned slightly forward. What we heard, she said clearly, is a textbook example of coercive control. Mr. Combs described an intentional system of dominance, one that used various tools to ensure obedience and silence. This includes economic leverage, career manipulation, intimidation, surveillance, psychological pressure, drug use, and legal silencing through NDAs. She paused briefly, allowing the jury to absorb her words. This wasn't spontaneous behavior or opportunism. It was an organized mechanism, built to entrap, isolate, and render individuals compliant and silent. The prosecutor followed up. In your view, what do phrases like consent is a contract, and I made them, suggest? Dr. Montgomery nodded solemnly. Those phrases are revealing. They reflect a mindset of entitlement and control. By framing consent as something transactional and fixed, something that can't be withdrawn, Mr. Combs was reinforcing the kind of psychological manipulation often found in coercive relationships. He wasn't just asserting power. He was normalizing the removal of agency. She then broke down how such systems typically evolve. Initially, the victim is drawn in with kindness and rewards, lavish gifts, exclusive opportunities, powerful connections. For young people chasing dreams in entertainment, these things are significant. That creates both dependency and loyalty. But over time, she continued, the dynamic shifts. Boundaries are pushed. A situation that starts with a gift might move into a setting that feels uncomfortable or exploitative. The victim, now compromised or indebted, finds it harder to say no or report the abuse. Dr. Montgomery's calm, clear delivery had the jury leaning in. The courtroom was silent once again, but this time, the silence wasn't shock. It was comprehension. The turning point. Dr. Montgomery's testimony marked the culmination of the prosecution's case. When she stepped down from the witness stand, the government rested, having painted a chilling, intricate portrait of abuse built on control, fear, and silence. With Diddy's voice captured on a verified recording openly describing acts the prosecution alleged, his defense team immediately requested a lengthy recess to regroup. Judge Tarnowski granted the delay, but she was firm. We will proceed to closing arguments tomorrow. The jury will begin deliberations by the end of the week. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Diddy stayed seated at the defense table, unmoving. His expression was blank, unreadable. Around him, his attorneys spoke in hushed tones, clearly strategizing, but the weight of the moment was unmistakable. The once untouchable mogul, Sean Diddy Combs, looked, for the first time, like a man who understood how much he stood to lose. Breaking down the strategy. Before testimony ended, Dr. Montgomery was asked to clarify the deeper psychological impact of the system Diddy allegedly orchestrated. She did not mince words. When Mr. Combs talked about using the right substances to make people more flexible, he wasn't being metaphorical. He was describing a premeditated tactic to bypass consent. True consent must be conscious, sober, and freely given. Anything else is manipulation or worse. Her calm, analytical tone gave structure to what had once seemed confusing or chaotic. Moments that earlier appeared to be misunderstandings or isolated events were now clearly components of a carefully managed scheme, designed to entrap and silence. The prosecutor asked how this affects victims in the long term. Dr. Montgomery explained that such trauma often lingers for years, sometimes decades, before individuals feel safe enough to speak. When someone is victimized by a powerful figure with enormous wealth and influence, fear becomes a rational survival tool. Victims learn early on that resistance can lead to punishment, ridicule, career destruction, or worse. So they stay quiet. That silence isn't weakness, it's learned protection. She referenced a pivotal line from the recording. Diddy saying, "Who's going to believe them? Their word against mine." That question, spoken aloud by Mr. Combs, is the cornerstone of coercive systems. It's the belief that no one will listen, that the abuser is too powerful to challenge. And for a long time, that belief was not wrong. Cross-examination falls flat. During cross-examination, the defense treaded lightly. Their strategy, to challenge the nuances of memory, to suggest that relationships involving power gaps can still be consensual. Dr. Montgomery acknowledged these points. Yes, memory can be imperfect. Yes, power dynamics exist in many relationships. But what separates ordinary imbalance from exploitation, she said, is intentionality. When someone is deliberately using career influence, intoxicants, blackmail, and surveillance to control others, there is no ambiguity. That's a system of domination, not a relationship. She repeatedly circled back to the same damning phrases from the tape, the use of substances, the threats, the rewards for compliance language. Her answers left little room for the defense to maneuver. A new understanding. As Dr. Montgomery was dismissed from the stand, the courtroom sat in heavy silence. Her testimony hadn't just explained the prosecution's case, it had translated it. The jury now had a lens through which every prior piece of testimony could be reinterpreted. Alleged victims sitting in the gallery wept quietly. Several held hands. For them, this moment was more than legal. It was emotional vindication. Reporters typed furiously, already envisioning headlines like "Expert Unmasks Diddy's System of Control" and "The Architecture of Abuse." Before ending the day, Judge Tarnowski addressed the court. "Given the gravity of today's testimony, we will reconvene at 9 a.m. to discuss next steps, including any motions from either party." She turned to the jury. "You are reminded not to speak about this case to anyone, not friends, not family, not even each other, and avoid all media coverage until your duty is complete." As the courtroom cleared out, the impact of the recording, now fully authenticated and placed within a clear psychological framework, loomed over everyone. The trial was no longer about conflicting perspectives. It was about a system, a pattern, a strategy. And the man who once ruled the music world now walked out with his head low, surrounded by lawyers, his public charisma eclipsed by the weight of his own words. The next morning, a dramatic shift. By the next morning, the atmosphere surrounding the courthouse had transformed completely. The leaked recording had made national headlines overnight, with legal experts calling it a potential turning point, evidence that could bring the entire defense crumbling down. Crowds had gathered early, now larger and more energized, split between those rallying in support and others demanding accountability. Protesters and supporters held signs, their chants echoing across the courthouse steps. Heightened security measures were immediately apparent, setting a tense and uneasy mood even before the day's session began. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution team arrived ahead of schedule, composed and seemingly buoyed by the developments. Across the aisle, the defense table remained conspicuously empty until just before the hearing was set to resume. Then, Sean "Diddy" Combs entered, flanked by an enlarged legal entourage that now included 2 additional attorneys with reputations for high-stakes crisis response, clearly a last-minute reinforcement. As Judge Tarnowski ascended the bench, she quickly acknowledged the shift in the courtroom's energy. I'm told the defense wishes to address the court before we proceed, she said. Diddy's lead attorney rose from his seat. Yes, Your Honor. After thorough consultation with our client, we are requesting a short recess in order to explore a possible resolution with the prosecution. A collective murmur swept through the gallery. The judge arched an eyebrow, but her tone remained measured. Is the defense suggesting Mr. Combs intends to change his plea? At this time, we are simply requesting time to confer with the government regarding potential options, Your Honor. Judge Tarnowski turned her attention to the prosecution. Does the government have a response to this request? The lead prosecutor stood without hesitation. Your Honor, the government remains open to productive discussion. However, given the stage we are at in the trial, and considering the compelling nature of the evidence already submitted, any agreement must reflect both the gravity of the charges and the strength of our position. The judge paused briefly, her expression thoughtful. I'll allow a 2-hour recess to accommodate these discussions. Court will reconvene at 11:30. She turned to the jurors. Members of the jury, we have a procedural matter to attend to. You are excused until 11:30. Please continue to avoid media coverage and refrain from discussing the case with anyone. As the jurors quietly exited, hushed conversations quickly broke out among those who remained. Journalists filed out in a rush, eager to report on the significant development. Plea talks were evidently in motion. At the defense table, Diddy leaned in toward his legal team, speaking in low, urgent tones. His expression was somber, reflecting a man confronting the gravity of his circumstances. The defense rejects the plea deal. When court resumed promptly at 11:30, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Judge Tarnowski brought the room to order and turned to address both legal teams. Have the parties come to any agreement? She asked. The lead prosecutor stood. No, Your Honor. The government extended an offer that we believe reflects the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence presented. That offer has been declined by the defense. Diddy's attorney rose to confirm. That's correct, Your Honor. Our client finds the proposed terms unacceptable. We are ready to proceed with the trial. The judge gave a brief nod. Very well. Please bring in the jury. As the jurors returned to their seats, many cast subtle, inquisitive glances at Diddy, as though trying to piece together whether something significant had just transpired. Melissa Chin's testimony, a former assistant, comes forward. The prosecution then called its next witness to the stand, Melissa Chin, who served as Diddy's assistant from 2012 through 2017. Chin, poised and serious, took her seat under oath. Once her work history had been established, the prosecutor asked, Miss Chin, were you able to hear the recording played in court yesterday? I was, she responded. FBI investigators shared it with me about 6 months ago. What was your reaction to hearing it? Chin inhaled slowly before answering. Relief. That someone had actually recorded one of those conversations. For years, we were told that unless we had proof, no one would ever believe us. Can you explain what you mean by those conversations? Mr. Combs had a way of speaking to those closest to him, talking about how everything was transactional, how control was maintained. I'd heard many of those same phrases about consent being a contract, about systems and control, dozens of times during my years working for him. The prosecutor then brought up an exhibit on the courtroom monitors. Miss Chin, this is marked as Exhibit 26. Can you identify it? Chin scanned the emails on screen. Yes. These are emails between me and other staff members regarding what we called special events held at Mr. Combs's properties. What was your responsibility in organizing those events? I handled all the logistics, guest lists, catering, security, transportation. I was also in charge of having all attendees sign non-disclosure agreements and collecting phones or any other devices that could record. The judge gave a brief nod. Very well. Please bring in the jury. As the jurors returned to their seats, many cast subtle, inquisitive glances at Diddy, as though trying to piece together whether something significant had just transpired. Melissa Chin's testimony, a former assistant, comes forward. The prosecution then called its next witness to the stand, Melissa Chin, who served as Diddy's assistant from 2012 through 2017. Chin, poised and serious, took her seat under oath. Once her work history had been established, the prosecutor asked, "Miss Chin, were you able to hear the recording played in court yesterday?" "I was," she responded. "FBI investigators shared it with me about 6 months ago." "What was your reaction to hearing it?" Chin inhaled slowly before answering. "Relief. That someone had actually recorded one of those conversations. For years, we were told that unless we had proof, no one would ever believe us." "Can you explain what you mean by those conversations?" Mr. Combs had a way of speaking to those closest to him, talking about how everything was transactional, how control was maintained. I'd heard many of those same phrases about consent being a contract, about systems and control, dozens of times during my years working for him. The prosecutor then brought up an exhibit on the courtroom monitors. "Miss Chin, this is marked as Exhibit 26. Can you identify it?" Chin scanned the emails on screen. "Yes. These are emails between me and other staff members regarding what we called special events held at Mr. Combs's properties." "What was your responsibility in organizing those events?" "I handled all the logistics, guest lists, catering, security, transportation. I was also in charge of having all attendees sign non-disclosure agreements and collecting phones or any other devices that could record." The prosecutor zoomed in on specific wording from one message. "This line references the usual supplies. What does that phrase refer to?" Though she kept her voice even, Chin's discomfort was evident. "That meant various drugs, primarily MDMA, ketamine, and GHB, that were routinely available at these events. Documentation supplies referred to video equipment set up in certain rooms." "And what was the intended use of this recording equipment?" Mr. Combs called it insurance. He believed everyone should have leverage on each other. That's how he maintained control, by making sure no one was safe if they turned on him. As she continued, Chin laid out a structure that matched the one described in the damning audio, a calculated and manipulative environment aimed at coercion and silence. "We were all part of it in some way," she said quietly. "Everyone had done something they didn't want exposed. That fear kept us in line." "Why did you decide to come forward now?" the prosecutor asked. For the first time, Chin's gaze met Diddy's directly. "I stayed quiet for a long time. I'd signed several NDAs and was scared. But when I saw the video of Mr. Combs assaulting his former partner in that hotel hallway, something in me snapped. That could have been any one of us. That could have been me." She went on. "I reached out to an attorney who connected me with the FBI. I didn't know if they'd take me seriously, but I couldn't keep hiding. I didn't want to be complicit anymore." The prosecutor asked if she recognized any of the victims who had already testified. Chin confirmed, explaining she had seen many of the same behaviors they described. Enthusiastic women arriving, only to leave dazed and distressed. There was a routine, she said. They'd be separated from the friends they came with, introduced to Mr. Combs in private, encouraged to drink or take substances. Then things would happen, things they hadn't agreed to. Afterward, they'd be given gifts or promises. That was the contract he referred to in that recording. As she spoke, Diddy's appearance began to shift noticeably. The once confident figure now sat hunched and hollow-eyed. His attorneys tried to engage him, whispering urgently, but he appeared detached, staring into the distance, absorbing the full weight of the testimony against him. During cross-examination, the defense tried to paint Chin as bitter over her termination and motivated by personal gain. She conceded she was fired in 2017, but firmly denied any financial incentive. "I knew the cost of speaking out," she said plainly. "I've been threatened, shut out of the industry, and harassed. But I couldn't stay quiet while others were still being harmed." As she stepped down, her testimony, paired with the recording, left a mounting sense of credibility that the defense was struggling to counter. Many members of the jury continued to take notes, visibly moved by what they had heard. Dr. James Wilson's testimony, the science behind consent. Next, the prosecution called Dr. James Wilson, a toxicologist who had tested biological samples from several of the alleged victims within 24 hours of their attendance at Diddy's events. Dr. Wilson's tone was measured and clinical, but the implications of his findings were damning. He described the presence of GHB, ketamine, and MDMA in the victim's systems, drugs known to cause confusion, memory disruption, and increased compliance, while still leaving a person physically active. These substances, when used together, can render someone capable of engaging in activities while unable to form coherent memories or make informed decisions, he explained. It creates a condition where apparent consent is not valid consent. The prosecutor linked this directly to the recording, in which Diddy mentioned using the right substances to make people more cooperative. Dr. Wilson confirmed that the drug combinations found would induce precisely that state of vulnerability. After his testimony concluded, Judge Tarnowski called for a brief recess. As the room slowly emptied, Diddy remained seated. He did not speak. He did not move. The man who had once seemed untouchable now looked utterly diminished, boxed in by his own words and the people who had finally come forward to challenge them. His silence said everything. The final reckoning. When court came back into session, the defense dropped a bombshell. Diddy intended to change his plea and admit guilt to all charges. After conferring with the victims, the prosecution accepted the change but made their position clear. They would pursue the maximum penalties allowed by the law. Judge Tarnowski turned her attention to Diddy, initiating a detailed plea colloquy to ensure he fully grasped the rights he was surrendering and the severity of the potential punishment. She asked if he was acting under pressure or duress. Diddy responded solemnly, "No, Your Honor. I'm pleading guilty because I am guilty. I've caused serious harm to many people over a long time. I can't undo that, but I can acknowledge it and take responsibility." The judge then scheduled the sentencing hearing for 6 weeks later and ordered that Diddy be taken into custody in the meantime. As he was escorted out in handcuffs, several of the victims who had taken the stand watched from their seats. Some clung to each other's hands. Others wiped away quiet tears. The man once thought to be beyond reach was now facing the consequences of his actions. The final reckoning. When court resumed, anticipation filled the room. Rumors of a potential plea had circulated overnight, but the defense made no such move. Instead, they announced they would continue fighting the charges, despite the explosive impact of the recording and expert testimony. The prosecution, undeterred, made clear their next steps. They would double down on their presentation of evidence, call additional witnesses if necessary, and press for the harshest penalties if a conviction is reached. Judge Tarnowski addressed both sides with stern efficiency, reiterating the timeline for closing arguments and instructing the defense to prepare for a fast-moving conclusion. As the day's session unfolded, the atmosphere in the courtroom remained heavy. The jury was more attentive than ever, eyes fixed on every movement, every whispered word between attorneys. The emotional weight of the previous day's testimony still lingered in the air. Diddy sat at the defense table, flanked by his legal team, his expression unreadable. He no longer looked defiant, but neither did he show signs of surrender. If his team had considered a plea deal behind closed doors, they had abandoned that route for now. In the gallery, several alleged victims who had testified remained present. Some held hands tightly, others kept their gaze locked on the man accused of shaping the system that had harmed them. Their presence was a quiet reminder of the stakes. The trial was far from over, but the prosecution had clearly seized the upper hand. With the defendant's own recorded words laid out in court and interpreted by expert testimony, their case had taken on a sense of momentum that the defense seemed increasingly unprepared to counter. As the court adjourned for the day, Judge Tarnowski reminded the jury of their responsibilities. You are not to discuss this case with anyone, nor are you to consume any media coverage related to it. Your duty is to remain impartial and to base your conclusions solely on the evidence presented here in this courtroom. Her gavel struck sharply, bringing the day's proceedings to a close. The trial was nearing its most decisive phase. The final outcome still hung in the balance. But for the first time, it was clear. The truth was closing in. The legacy still unfolding. Even before a verdict is reached, The Diddy trial has become a flashpoint in the ongoing reckoning with power and exploitation in entertainment. Lawmakers in several states are proposing legislation aimed at curbing the misuse of non-disclosure agreements in cases involving sexual misconduct. Meanwhile, industry insiders are pushing for better protections for emerging artists, including third-party oversight and accessible reporting systems. Yet the most significant legacy may be cultural, not legal. The case has reinforced a vital truth. Even the most powerful can be held to account, and no reputation is immune to scrutiny when victims find their voice. And all of it stemmed from one moment. A single recording that captured more than just words. It revealed the machinery of control behind the public persona. As the trial heads into its final stretch, one thing is certain. This story is not just about one man. It's about who gets to speak, who is believed, and whether justice in the modern age can reach those who once seemed untouchable.